It was supposed to be the pride of a new Reich, an invincible fortress of steel gliding over the Atlantic, immune to destruction, unstoppable in pursuit. Yet in less than 10 days, it would become a blazing tomb beneath the waves, torn apart not by superior firepower alone, but by fear, by decisions, and by fate itself. Why did the Bismarck, the most powerful battleship in Europe, fall so quickly, so violently? And what does her doomed voyage tell us about the illusion of strength? The cracks within empires and the quiet moments where history tips on a breath, because in war, it's not always the mightiest guns that decide the outcome, but the silences between orders, the hesitations of men, and the ghosts that follow them. It is May 18th, 1941, deep inside the harbor of Gotenhafen, nestled along the Baltic coast of Nazi-occupied Poland. The Bismarck prepares to set sail at over 250 meters long and armed with 8 15-inch guns. She is Germany's greatest warship, a symbol of Hitler's vision of naval dominance. She is accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, and under the command of Fleet Admiral Gunther Lutyens, a stern, experienced officer with deep reservations about the mission ahead. Their objective, Operation Rheinübung, a bold breakout into the North Atlantic to wreak havoc on Allied shipping lanes, disrupt the British war economy, and strike a psychological blow to Churchill's Britain. But already, things are going wrong. Originally planned as a multi-vessel operation involving the battleship Gneisenau and others, mechanical failures and delays leave Bismarck and Prince Eugen to go alone, a fateful reduction in strength that even the stoic Lutyens knows is dangerous. By May 21st, the two ships are spotted refueling in Bergen, Norway. British intelligence is watching. By May 23rd, they are spotted again, this time by the cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk in the Denmark Strait. The cat is out of the bag. Winston Churchill gives the order, sink the Bismarck. At 5:30 a.m. on May 24th, the fate of the Atlantic hangs in fog and fire. Two British capital ships, HMS Hood, the symbolic pride of the Royal Navy, and HMS Prince of Wales, a new but still incomplete battleship, close the distance. Rain squalls drift over the water, the seas are cold, and on the bridge of the Bismarck, Lutyens watches and waits. Captain Ernst Lindemann, Bismarck's commanding officer, senses the urgency. Permission to open fire. He asks once, then again louder, more insistent. Lutyens hesitates, bound by orders to avoid direct confrontation, but orders fade beneath the scream of incoming shells. Open fire. He finally commands. A storm of steel is unleashed. At 5:55 a.m., Bismarck and Prince Eugen return fire shells tearing across the 26-kilometer gap. Prince Eugen scores the first hit on Hood, igniting a fire amidships. Then, the shot that changed history, a salvo from Bismarck penetrates Hood's magazine, triggering a cataclysmic explosion. A column of fire and smoke rises 300 meters into the air. In under 3 minutes, the Hood breaks in two and sinks beneath the waves. Out of 1,418 men, only 3 survive. The Royal Navy is stunned. The Prince of Wales continues to fight, taking hits and dealing some in return. But she is forced to withdraw under a smokescreen. On the German ships, some cheer, but Lutyens does not. He orders Bismarck to press on, but the victory is hollow. Bismarck is damaged. Her forward radar is out. The forecastle is holed in flooding. She leaks oil, a trail the British can follow. She cannot continue the mission. Lutyens sends Prince Eugen onward alone. While Bismarck turns toward the French coast to Saint-Nazaire for urgent repairs, He reports to Berlin, battlecruiser, probably Hood, Zunk. Second battleship turned away, damaged. Two cruisers shadowing, but the British are not done. From the air, a British Sunderland patrol plane picks up the oil slick and calls in reinforcements. The Bismarck is now being hunted. There is a moment in every great naval pursuit where steel gives way to psychology for Admiral Lutyens. That moment began not with the thunderclap of Hood's explosion, but with the silence that followed. Even in victory, he saw the storm coming not from the Prince of Wales, but from the Royal Navy's wrath now fully awakened. Despite commanding the mightiest ship afloat, Lutyens knew the Bismarck was vulnerable. With her fuel lines damaged, rudder partially compromised, and her oil trail betraying every turn, the real battle had just begun. A race against time, against pursuit, and against the ghosts of hubris. And yet, he made a critical decision. He chose to break radio silence. Perhaps Lutyens believed the British already knew too much. Perhaps he overestimated his ability to mislead them. But each signal he sent back to Berlin was like a beacon drawing destroyers, cruisers, and aircraft from every corner of the Atlantic. The British Admiralty was now in full response. Winston Churchill himself was personally tracking every report, and on May 26th, he issued one of the most famous orders in Royal Navy history. Sink the Bismarck. It must be sunk at all costs. This wasn't about tactics anymore. This was vengeance for the Hood. This was national pride. It was imperial memory clashing with Nazi ambition, and only one would survive. On the afternoon of May 26th, the British found her again, a long-range Catalina flying boat, searching the suspected quadrant, spotted Bismarck just before nightfall. At that moment, the ship was making good speed, still hoping to reach the safety of Luftwaffe cover near the French coast. But now the trap could be set. From the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, a squadron of swordfish biplanes, slow, obsolete relics of an earlier era, were launched into the growing dusk. These aircraft shouldn't have posed a threat. They flew low, lumbering across the waves. Their open cockpits and canvas skins belonged more to the First World War than the Second. But in that moment, their slowness became their salvation. German anti-aircraft gunners, trained on fast, modern bombers, found it impossible to track the fluttering swordfish. Predictive fire control systems advanced, mechanized, and precise failed to lock onto something so rudimentary. The first attack had failed to cripple the ship, but then came the second wave. One torpedo slammed into Bismarck's side, a glancing blow, but another found the rudder. It was the one hit that mattered most. Bismarck could still steam, her engines untouched, but she could no longer steer. The wounded beast of the Atlantic was now limping in slow, agonizing circles. She would never make port. The decision was final. There would be no escape. On the bridge, Admiral Lutyens received the damage reports in grim silence. The engineers tried desperately to free the jammed rudder, even managing to regain partial control, but the heavy seas and the listing of the ship made it true navigation impossible. By 1 a.m. on May 27th, Lutyens sent his final message to Berlin. Ship no longer maneuverable. We shall fight to the last. Long live the Führer. This was not the calm resolve of a sailor. This was the voice of a man who knew the sea had turned against him, and history would not forgive. And still, he remained on the bridge. He would not survive the sunrise. As the first light of day crept over the waves, two British battleships, HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, closed in. They had been steaming all night, on course for this precise moment. Escort destroyers fanned out ahead, cutting off any last hope of retreat. The Bismarck, circling helplessly, awaited her and, at 8:47 a.m., Rodney opened fire. A full broadside. The shells, each weighing over 900 kilograms, arced high, then crashed into the sea just short of the Bismarck. On board, the surviving command staff ordered return fire. The Bismarck's guns roared back, but it was chaos. The rudderless ship couldn't hold a firing angle. The roll and yaw of the damaged vessel made aiming impossible. Her shots went wild. The British closed in. Their next salvo found its mark. Rodney's shell smashed into the fore superstructure, the heart of command. In a single detonation, the bridge was obliterated. Lieutenants, Lindemann, and most of the senior staff were killed instantly. Now, a ship without eyes, without voice, fought on run by junior officers and terrified sailors. The punishment continued. Shell after shell rained down. One by one, the gun turrets were destroyed. Flames erupted across the decks. The once proud hull began to buckle, torn apart from bow to stern. But Bismarck refused to die. At 9:30 a.m., her last gun fired one final shot, a feeble, defiant gesture. At 10:00 a.m., her damage control chief gave the order, scuttle the ship. Explosive charges were set. The crew, those who could, abandoned ship, leaping into the freezing Atlantic, clinging to debris. The charges blew at 10. Archer and the once invincible Titan began her final descent into darkness. When the Bismarck slipped beneath the waves on May 27th, 1941, it did more than end a chase. It ended an illusion. Only 114 of the 2,200 men aboard survived. The pride of Nazi Germany's Kriegsmarine, the symbol of technological superiority and Aryan invincibility, had lasted just over 8 days in active combat operations. And yet, for all the firepower, it wasn't superior guns or armor that sealed her fate. It was strategy, timing, and above all, the relentless coordination of a Royal Navy unwilling to lose the second round. Germany had wagered on a new kind of surface warfare, bold capital ships, slipping past blockades, targeting lifelines, and forcing Britain to divert its own naval strength into reactive, piecemeal hunts. In theory, it could have worked, but the death of the Hood didn't cripple British morale. It ignited it. Churchill and the Royal Navy used the loss as a rallying cry. Newspapers thundered with headlines. Citizens followed the Bismarck's every movement like a drama in real time. The manhunt became more than a tactical mission. It became a statement. And when Bismarck fell, the message to the world was clear. Britain would not yield. For the German Navy, the consequences were catastrophic. Hitler himself was enraged, in a fury, and he lashed out at the Admiralty and shifted his faith entirely towards submarine warfare, a strategy that would dominate the next phase of the Battle of the Atlantic. Surface fleet ambitions, those grand capital ships that echoed the Kaiser's Navy of World War I, were quietly shelved. Never again would the Kriegsmarine attempt such a daring surface breakout. The surviving sailors of Bismarck, rescued mostly by British ships and a single German weather vessel, would live the rest of the war in captivity. Among them, engineers, gunners, signal officers, men who had followed orders, fought bravely, and ultimately been sacrificed for a plan they never controlled. But history has its own form of justice. An irony, in many ways, the story of the Bismarck is a metaphor for the Nazi regime itself. Vast resources poured into a single, menacing vision, a sense of invulnerability built not on wisdom, but on arrogance, and a fall that came not only from opposition, but from within. Because the fatal blows were not just British torpedoes or heavy shells, they were also the miscalculation of sending too small a force, the failure to maintain radio silence, the hesitancy of leadership in the heat of battle, the belief that one ship could outwit an empire. Each decision, like each compartment of a warship when breached, contributed to the flooding. By the end, Bismarck was not sunk by one great act, but by a cascade of fractures in the whole of strategy, psychology, and command. In the decades that followed, Bismarck remained an icon, not of triumph, but of tragedy. In 1989, ocean explorer Robert Ballard, the same man who had discovered the wreck of the Titanic, located the remains of the Bismarck nearly 5,000 meters beneath the sea. She lies upright, mostly intact, her gun still trained at ghosts. He described the ship as eerily preserved, a silent monument to hubris, sacrifice, and the cruel mathematics of war. The debate lingers even now. Was it right to scuttle the ship? Or would she have sunk regardless? Could Lutyens have evaded the British if he'd made different choices? Or was the Bismarck doomed from the moment she sailed? In classrooms, naval colleges, and documentaries, these questions are still asked not because the answers change history, but because they help us understand the men inside it. Somewhere deep in the Atlantic, beneath miles of blackened water and sediment, the wreck of the Bismarck rests in silence. Her guns long rusted, her hull split open, and above her, the sea goes on, indifferent. She was born of power, not just mechanical, but political, a product of nationalism, ambition, and the deep scars of Versailles. Her steel plates were forged in the foundries of a regime obsessed with symbols, and her death became one of the greatest symbols of all. But perhaps the most haunting legacy of the Bismarck lies not in what she did, but in what she revealed: that no machine, no matter how mighty, can outrun the burden of flawed command, because her end was not caused by British torpedoes alone. It came from silences that lasted too long, messages sent too freely, and orders followed too rigidly. In a war of total ideology, the Bismarck was still just a ship vulnerable to physics, weather, and human fallibility. And still, in the swirling fog of that morning, in May 1941, there was a choice. Had Lutyens broken toward Iceland, rather than press on to France? Had the rudder not jammed? Had the British missed her on that final flight? We might remember the Bismarck not as a tragedy, but as a terror of the Atlantic. Instead, she became a final gasp of old-world naval power, a floating myth shattered before it ever truly lived. In that sense, the Bismarck was both beginning and end. The last great battleship duel in European waters, the final time steel giants clashed before aircraft carriers, submarines, and guided missiles rewrote the rules of naval warfare. The last echo of the dreadnought age, buried beneath modern war. But history, like the ocean, is layered, and down in the cold, dark, deep, she waits, a question preserved in steel. If power alone cannot save you, what can? Thank you for watching Legacy Files. If you found this journey as haunting as we did, subscribe, and join us as we uncover the forgotten truths, lost empires, and turning points that still shape our world. Because history is never really gone, it just waits beneath the surface.